Today I'm talking to Vicky Johnson, who's a residentiary canon at Ely Cathedral. Hi Vicky.
Hello.
So you have a doctorate in biochemistry and you've just been organising a month-long science festival at the cathedral as part of your work, overseeing outreach and congregational growth. So obviously you've got a background in science and theology. So can I just find out where the idea for that great big science festival came from?
Well, I think it's probably been brewing in my mind for quite a long time. Being trained as a scientist and now working in the church, I've often felt really strongly that the church should be a place where science is celebrated. And in some ways it always has been a place where science has been celebrated. So that the idea kind of started from, I suppose, this passion and my own interests. But as we rolled along, more and more people became interested, and the idea grew and grew and grew into a massive science festival, which took place in Ely Cathedral.
Yeah, so was this part of your remit when you were hired? Were you specifically, we want a scientist because we want to do things with science?
No, I think that was a happy accident. And it just so happens, of course, that Ely Cathedral is in the middle of a part of the country where science is huge, and it forms a massive part of our economy. Lots of scientists live in Ely and live in Cambridge and in the surrounding areas and work in those areas. So it just so happened that I was a scientist by training. I don't think it was planned or engineered in any way, but it's proved to be a happy accident because it's allowed us as a cathedral to make connections to the scientific community in this area.
Great. And so what actually happened when you opened the doors of the cathedral, put on all these science events? What transpired?
What transpired? Well, it was amazing. There were so many people who engaged with what we were doing. We had a schools art exhibition. We had a major exhibition in Our Lady Chapel where we were so lucky to be able to exhibit an original copy of Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica and Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species, as well as a dinosaur, local artefacts, fossils, molecular models, and scientific artwork. So we had that going on, then we had lectures and events for families and children and hands-on experiments in the cathedral. So it was a whole range of different kinds of events which allowed people of whatever age and whatever background to engage in science in some way.
Yeah, and I was at the hands-on part, and I was just saying to you earlier that I thought it was amazing just to be in a cathedral and watching children really enjoying science in that context.
Yeah, the event that we're talking about is something called, well, we called it a night at the cathedral, taking as its inspiration some of the things you see often in museums, night at the museum. So the cathedral was open, we had loads of exhibitors, including the Faraday Institute, local scientists and science organisations, sort of sharing their wares with exhibitions and displays and interactive activities. And we held two of those events. At the first one, I think we had about 400 people come through. And at the second one, which was in half-term week, we had 1,000 people coming through the cathedral, engaging with science in the most amazing way. So I think actually they were my favourite events. They had such a positive feel, kind of lots of people being curious and asking questions, and loads of brilliant scientists talking to the public about their work. So I think they were probably my favourite events in the whole festival.
Yeah, me too. And at Science and Belief, we're interested in the wonders of the living world and the questions about meaning and purpose that they raise. And obviously, we both saw lots of people enjoying those wonders in the festival. Did you get any sense of the sorts of questions it might have been raising for them?
Yeah, this was the really interesting thing about the festival and being kind of on the ground as events were unfolding. I did have some quite profound conversations with members of the public who came into the cathedral and were just wowed by what we were doing and the science input that they were getting. And someone came up to me and said, I didn't think churches or cathedrals were interested in this stuff. And I'm just blown away that you are. And then I could explain to them that I was a scientist and actually the church is really interested in science and technology, and in a way, the whole festival was celebrating that fact. So that was really fascinating for me to actually engage with people who, for whom the Science Festival was really busting myths about the church and science. Because we were having a Science Festival in a cathedral.
Yeah, it's kind of a case in point. And did you get any glimpse of any sort of theological or philosophical questions that people were asking as they had this sort of license to explore? Did things pop out?
Yeah, I think it did raise theological and philosophical questions for people, because a lot of the events we were doing, particularly our lecture series, was raising questions in people's minds about how we live in the world that we live in, and how we care for it, how we are stewards of it, how we interpret it in the light of a living faith. So I think lots of the questions that people were asking or were being brought out in people were to do with those things. And another interesting conversation I had was talking to someone who at first had some doubts about exploring science in the cathedral, and together we talked through those doubts and started thinking about the God we both believed in. Is that God over all things, or do we believe in a God who only works on Sundays in the church? And we both agreed that we believe in a God over all things and in and throughout all creation. And the Science Festival was provoking that kind of question. And it's, in some ways, it was challenging people as to how they place science in the context of a living faith. So for me, that was really important.
So as if science is something you can do within the context of your faith because it's encompassed by it.
I think that's where we were getting to, and that doesn't mean that our faith can't ask questions of science, especially in terms of ethics and the kind of experiments that we do and the kind of knowledge we want to have and how we use that knowledge. But I think science as a discipline in itself is the God-given gift of an inquiring mind. So that was certainly something we were trying to promote, that idea that we've been given minds to think and wonder and ask questions about creation, and then use it, care for it, and enjoy it.
Yeah, exactly. And so you're a biochemist, and you were in a lab for a while before you became ordained. So did your work there produce any meaning or purpose type questions?
Yeah, so I was studying cancer development. So I was a biochemist studying basic mechanisms in cancer development. So I was looking at the way cells develop and grow, and how sometimes those processes become compromised and might lead to mutations and ultimately cancer. So there were different aspects of my work. I went into science because I felt I had the vocation to help people and to do something positive. So that was always there. But also when you're in a lab and you're lucky enough to see some of these minute processes that are going on in our body all the time, you can't help but have some wonder and awe for what's going on every second of every day in our bodies. And having a tiny insight into some of those processes was also an inspiration for me. So I certainly saw God in the Lab, which I think is the title of one of your books.
Thanks, yeah.
I think that was always there. It wasn't like the laboratory was a completely sterile environment for faith. I never felt that.
Yeah, and so you then went on to train for the ministry, which involved studying theology. And did that change anything for you in doing that?
It didn't. In a sense, it didn't. I've always been of the opinion that theology, I think it was Aquinas who said theology is like the queen of the sciences. And I always felt like my scientific mind was always asking questions, always wondering, always trying to figure out what was going on in the world. And actually those same things are true in theology. You're trying to ask questions and explore and wonder about what's going on in the world. It's just a slightly different lens. So I've never seen anything in sort of conflicting between proper scientific study and theology. I think they're both, in a sense, disciplines which allow you to ask questions, or they should be.
And did it help your sense of wonder and awe to grow, or did it change in any way?
Yeah, I think it kind of helped, doing theology helped me articulate what I'd been feeling for a long time in science. It gave me the language to pull everything together in my own mind. And then having confidence in theology and science allows me to practically do things like the science festival we did at Ely, because there was a lot of thought behind the science festival here in the way we approached the subject and in the kinds of questions we were asking. So all of that practical stuff certainly has a foundation which was more thoughtful and reflective.
So what was the main sort of thought behind it?
I think the thought behind the science festival was we wanted to celebrate science. So that was definitely the approach we took. And in the whole arena of science and religion, we could have approached it in a very different way and made it more explicitly a science and religion debate. But what we actually wanted to do was to celebrate science in the context of our living faith. So I did have one question. Somebody said, "Oh, there's lots of science going on, but where's the religious bit?" And in a sense, that exactly, if you like, picked up on the point we were trying to make.
Yeah.
That in a sense, we wanted to just celebrate science as a gift of God in a cathedral. So the religious bit was how people interacted in that wonderful space of Ely Cathedral with the content of the science festival. So we want to give people some credit that they can wonder and think for themselves and ponder the questions that the science festival raised.
And certainly going into the entrance of the cathedral on that day when I was there and seeing all these wonderful pictures that children had made, huge banners, was just such a nice way to come in, to see, you're already surrounded by science within the architecture of the building, and then this great big space that always makes you think big thoughts, being full of scientific imagery, it just helped those thoughts to be, oriented in a different way.
Yeah, that was amazing. Some of the children's artwork was really fascinating, and their project was a cross-curricular project where they took things that they'd been learning from their science lessons and incorporated them into beautiful pieces of artwork around the cathedral. So in a sense, that did exactly what we wanted it to do. It just gave a wonderful image of art and science and faith working together in a really positive way.
Yes. And going through the Science Festival yourself, you had a month to not just frantically organise events, but to observe what was happening. And did you have any surprises? Were there any new thoughts for you as you experienced that?
I think what was really good and surprising, I suppose, or maybe it's not surprising at all, is how engaged people were and how interested people were and how open and accepting people were of celebrating science in a cathedral. Because in a way we took a risk with the Science Festival. We didn't know how people would receive it. And I think I was really, obviously, pleasantly surprised at how it was accepted and embraced, especially by the local community. So we think we had something like 14,000 visitors through the cathedral, engaging with the festival and the events. And I just think that's fantastic to reach people who might not always be able to get to Cambridge or to London, to sort of big scientific festivals and events. I think we were really pleased to bring it to a local level and allow people to really experience science hands-on. So I think that was a really positive surprise for me.
What about the sort of meaning and purpose questions? Were you struck by anything new, or did it just reinforce what you already thought?
I think probably in terms of meaning and purpose, it helped me think about science in a practical way. Some of the lectures really raised important questions about what science is doing right now, and how, as human beings, sometimes we are not being such good stewards of the creation. I think that was something that came through very strongly in some of our lectures, that actually in terms of meaning and purpose, we're at a point in human history where we really have to work together as the human race to protect the world we live in. And I think in terms of meaning and purpose, that brings loads of questions into my mind about how we work together, how we build community, how we get a sense of a common purpose, and a just world. So I think in a way it made me think about very practical issues that we need to be addressing.
Yeah, things that we need to actually be doing something about. And before we finish, are there any particularly fun facts or cool activities that you came across during the time?
I think there was one which I wasn't brave enough to do. We had some fantastic exhibitors from the Institute of Food Science who came to talk to us about the food of the future.
Oh, yeah.
Because obviously with populations growing, that there may be a time when we have to think differently about food. So they brought some bugs and insects, because obviously they're a massively rich source of protein.
Yes.
And I was a bit too nervous to try one of the bugs, but I think again that was a really practical way of addressing a really serious issue. So I think it's made me think a lot about kind of food production and what we eat and what we grow and how we farm. So that was a kind of a little kind of insight. It wasn't quite a fact, but I think I'll take away.
Yeah, more maggots in your curry.
Yeah.
Maybe dried ones.
Dried ones.
Great. And I think you're planning more events in the future, so watch this space.
Definitely.
Great. Well, thank you for talking to us today, Vicky.
Thank you.